Howdy folks, Gabriel Crazy Gaby Harbor here, founder of Fear the Beard Media. Are you a fantasy sports fan? If so, I've got an amazing offer for you. Rosters.com allows players to draft a new team every day, which is basically the most enjoyable aspect of traditional fantasy sports. This is called daily fantasy sports, and you may have heard about two of the leading companies, FanDuel.com and DraftKings.com. I can't personally vouch for them the way I can for the team at Rosters.com though. The entire staff cares deeply about each player's experience, which is why I trust them to take care of you. And get this, here's an offer you won't find anywhere else. If you sign up and deposit $20 right now at Rosters.com using promo code CRAZY, you'll receive an additional $20. For those of you counting at home, that's a total of $40 you can use to enter contests right away when you deposit just $20. Again, to cash in on this offer, simply sign up now and deposit $20 using promo code CRAZY at Rosters.com, and their team will credit you an additional $20. Would you like to start your own podcast? Or do you already have a podcast but wish you could focus more on recording great content and spend less time on all of the technical aspects? Fear the Beard Media wants to help you start a brand new podcast or maintain your existing feed absolutely free. When you join the Fear the Beard Media Podcast Network, we'll produce, post, and promote your podcast free of charge. That leaves more time for you to focus on what really matters: creating awesome audio content. If you're interested in joining the Fear the Beard Media Podcast Network, email us at fearthebeardmedia@gmail.com.
Football, the All-American game, is in fact a Canadian invention. The year was 1874, and the McGill University football team first implemented the modified rules of English rugby in a game with Harvard. The potent offense of today's game was not yet evident, and the game ended 0-0. In 1891, the Canadian Rugby Union was formed, followed by the birth of the Big Four, comprising teams from Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Our modern-day game certainly has no monopoly on competitiveness.
Welcome to the Daily Fantasy CFL Podcast. I am your host, Crazy Gaby, the host that doesn't do a whole lot, though. And the one who does do the heavy lifting is John Buffalo66 Sullivan, sitting here with me live internet studio instead of live in studio is what we'll go with. John, how you doing this week?
Doing pretty good. You made me that gave me like a flashback to like Mike TV and Willy Wonka and
live in studio.
The little particles flying overhead. Because I'm here, but I'm not really here. So.
Exactly. Let's hope that we can reverse that.
Let's not blow everybody's minds in the first 30 seconds.
Yeah, let's. Nobody needs to know how television works, John. That's above the pay grade for the Daily Fantasy CFL podcast. We're going to leave that to the scientists, and instead, I'm going to ask you, how did Week 4 end up going for you?
Well, for me, financially, it was a good week. My wagers went 2-0, and after the an 0-3 start betting this season, I'm now 3-3-1. So we're 3-0-1 in the last 2 weeks. I put out a DK roster, a DraftKings roster, on my Twitter page, and it was pretty average. I don't think it would have totally sucked. But it was on the it was in the low 100s, somewhere between like 100 and 110. I think this past week was very interesting from the tournament perspective, because if you did two tournament strategies, one stacking and two going contrarian, I think you probably did pretty well, and you're probably home counting your money right now. So why don't we just go ahead and talk about the games, and we'll see who did what and how it all panned out. All
right. It sounds like a plan to me. That takes us to the Red Blacks and the Argos. Tori Gurley, I see, was a last-minute scratch in that one. Does that affect a lot of people in the daily fantasy landscape?
There were some people that were kind of upset about that. You have to realize that this was the first game of the schedule, so you couldn't late swap him. He got hurt in warm-ups. I'm not exactly sure what the injury is. I think it was a hip or a leg. Told the coach he couldn't go, although he was dressed, so he sat on the bench the whole game. So halfway through the game, people were like, "Where's Tori Gurley?" And there were a lot of people that had him in daily fantasy, and they were not happy because he gave them a big fat 0. So let's talk about the game. It ended up being Ottawa Red Blacks 30 and Argos 20. This game was actually a pick'em, and I said last week, if this is a pick'em, I'm going to be all over Ottawa. I said, I would take Ottawa plus the points versus anybody in the league, and so I took this game, and it paid off for me. On the Ottawa side of the ball, Trevor Harris was great. He was just a tick under 400 yards, 392, I believe, and his main target was Greg Ellingson, who had 200 and change in receiving yards. That was a big day. And I have been on the wrong side of Chris Williams every week this season. The first 3 weeks I've avoided him, saying, he can't sustain those numbers. And he proved me wrong 3 weeks in a row. So I finally played him in week 4, saying you can't really fade him because everybody's going to have him on their cash lineups. And it wasn't a total dud, but it wasn't value. He was 11,000, and he put up 13 and a.
Now, do you still get credit for being right, even though it was a week too late?
I don't feel like I do. I certainly, caveat emptor, people. Trevor Harris obviously is the play there because this team Ottawa had 4 1,000-yard receivers in the CFL on their team last year. And that may sound awesome, but it's not really that amazing in the CFL because you have 18 games instead of 16.
Right.
And you have, a lot more passing. So these guys are all going to get their yards over the course of the season, but it seemed like Chris Williams and Trevor Harris had a special rapport. And so I did watch some of this game. I'm not really sure that they shut Chris Williams down. I think Trevor Harris just saw something somewhere else and exploited it. We talked about Torrey Gurley being a last-minute scratch, and so Kenny Shaw became the number 2 option for Toronto, and he went 7 catches for 94 yards. And going forward, if Gurley doesn't play again, he's going to be an amazing value. I think he's like 4,600 or something like that. Ricky Ray, the quarterback for Toronto, was average. I played him last week. I was hoping for a 300-yard game. He had like 250, 1 touchdown. So it was a very pedestrian game for him. And Nick Grigsby, the Kia salesman, handled the running duties for Ottawa and didn't fumble. And I think a lot of people are going to be on him going forward. But I think he's due to show why that he's been in and out of the league. It's kind of like Masoli for Hamilton. He's going to have that dumpster fire of a game at some point. So caveat emptor with him. And then Brandon Whitaker was definitely more a part of the offense this past week for Toronto, although they weren't in the lead. So he did not become the primary focus of the offense like he did when they played British Columbia. This game stayed under. I think the under was like 53.5. And somebody posted, somebody from one of those handicapping sites like Covers or Odd Sharks or one of those Bet Labs or I don't know which one, said something about the CFL was 10-5 on overs this season, and that's absolutely wrong. 3 of the 4 games this past week went under, and a lot of the games have gone under. I think they meant to say 10-5 to the under instead of 10-5 to the over, but this game was under. And I'm going to talk about, before we finish up this podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about betting totals in the CFL.
That takes us to the Eskimos and the Bombers. Another low total here that went under.
Yes, I actually had this game as well, and it was Eskimos 20, Bombers 16, and the over/under was 55.5. I think I got to 56 for a hot minute, but I bet the under here, and that came through for us. You would think from the score of 20-16 that this was a defensive battle, but it was pretty much just the opposite. It was quite the bend don't break type of defensive effort. Mike Riley, Edmonton quarterback, threw for 465 yards, had 2 scores. and both Adarius Bowman and Darrell Walker had huge games. They both put up 30-ish points. And if you had stacked those three together, which I would almost never recommend you doing, but hey, if a GPP and you've got money to burn, you just want to throw it in there, that would have paid off for you big time. I'm sure if you stacked Riley with both of those wide receivers, the thing about CFL for me is, you've got 6 receiving options, legit receiving options for each offense. And how do you know which 2 to pick, or which 3 to pick? Right. And if you had stacked Riley with one of those 2 receivers, you did fine. And then if you also threw in John White, they threw so much that John White, the running back, had a very quiet game. So he didn't earn very many points at all. He didn't hit value. On the Bomber side of the ball, the Bombers are the team that just can't have nice things. Drew Willie, he just missed the 300-yard bonus with 299 yards. And Andrew Harris, their running back, he's just productive. He only had 23 rushing yards or something like that, but he caught like 7 passes for 88 yards. So he just puts up the numbers every week. He's a safe play, I think, even at his price. He was like 7,600 or 7,900, something like that. Jace Davis was a player that I was on last week. I had him in all of my lineups that I put out, and he only had 3 catches for 30 yards. He just didn't get that many targets. I think he might have had about 5 targets, and I was expecting him to get about 10. And that's the thing about CFL with so many options. It's hard to predict those targets. So the thing about the Bombers that I want to point out is the coaching, and I can't stress this enough. First of all, the Bombers actually had the ball with with a minute and change left in their own half of the field, and were moving the ball. And if they'd scored a touchdown, they would have gone ahead and probably won the game. But because they managed their time so poorly in the last minute and change, they did not get anywhere close to being able to throw it into the end zone. And I think they ended the game on like some kind of screen pass where they didn't get out of bounds.
Just one of those plays where you end the game and you're kicking yourself because you didn't even give yourself a chance to win.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the coaching. O'Shea is the name of the coach for the Blue Bombers, and he may be a very good football coach, but he's made a mistake twice this season that if I was the owner of the Blue Bombers, I would have fired him for, and that is the fact that he has thrown the challenge flag on plays that are not reviewable twice.
Is that just an automatic loss of a timeout?
Well, it is a loss of a timeout. In the CFL, you get 2 timeouts, and one of the reasons why I talk about end of game and end of half management is so important is you get 2 timeouts for the whole game, and you're only allowed to use 1 timeout in the last 3 minutes. So you usually use one at some point before that, and then if you challenge something and you burn your timeout. If you lose a challenge, you burn a timeout. If you challenge something and you don't have a challenge, it's a delay a game penalty. Anyway, the point is he threw the flag on plays that were the exact situation escapes me. I'd have to go back and watch the game. But for 2 weeks in a row, he's thrown a flag and tried to get a review or call overturn on a play that's not reviewable. So he doesn't even know the review rules.
You think he'd have somebody shouting in his ear, letting him know when he could actually review a play and when he could not?
This is the thing. After the first time it happened in the earlier game, you would think that he would have set that up. But
right.
It's happened. Either that or he just, is caught up in the heat of the moment and he's too, gung-ho.
Prone to emotion, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So this game I actually liked the Bombers at +4, and it got to +4 for about an hour, but it closed at 3.5, and so I saw the total go way up to near 56, so I took the under and won on that. But if I had played the Bombers +4, it would have pushed. But going forward with Winnipeg, with the coaching until they show me something else. Their defense is decent. they're kind of the team that can get some takeaways. Their kicking is off the chain. They have the best kicker in the league. But their offense leaves a lot to be desired, and I don't know how much the head coach has to do with that or not. But it really, really concerns me.
Hamilton taking on the Alouettes. Rakeem Cato, that is a name a lot of us are familiar with, is it not?
Yeah, he played at Marshall. He was a quarterback, and then he was indoctrinated, if you will, into the CFL.
By the way, pour a sip of moonshine out on the concrete for a daily fantasy NCA. And people know about him solely because you were able to actually play college football fantasy sports, and I have a feeling that especially players from mid-majors, they're not going to be quite as known as they were during that brief time period.
No, as a matter of fact, if you go across the CFL right now, Bo Levi Mitchell is from it's either Montana or Washington, or like a 1AA school. And Drew Willie's from University of Buffalo, which is a Division I school, but not known as a football school.
They're in the MAC, correct?
Yes, they are in the MAC.
Yeah.
And Jordan Lynch, who played for Northern Illinois, was a Heisman finalist. He's the short yardage quarterback for the Edmonton Eskimos. Anyway, there's a lot of connections there. The score of this game was Hamilton 31, Alouettes 7. And I really wanted to bet Hamilton. It really wasn't wasn't that many points. I forget what it closed at, but I went 2-0 in my first two bets, and I just decided to sit it out for the rest of the week. But Rakeem Cato had a very poor game stat-wise, but if you watch the game, it wasn't really his fault. The Montreal O-line was terrible. Montreal is decimated by injuries. Jerron Carter played because he appealed his suspension. I actually think he probably should have just sat this one out and got a suspension over with, because it looked like they were, in for a bad day. So he was really a non-factor in the game. He caught a couple of balls. They didn't give him any rushes. As a matter of fact, Hamilton didn't look that great in the first half either. And the game was 5-4 at halftime, and actually Hamilton kicked a field goal. It's funny because it was 4-0, and with a minute and 20 left in the first half, Montreal was backed up in their own end zone, so they gave up a safety to make it 4-2, and then they kicked off from the 35-yard line, and then Hamilton came down the field and kicked a field goal at the end of the first half and took a 5-4 lead. But in the third quarter, Brandon Banks, our boy that we talk about every week, had a punt return touchdown. I think it was 86 yards or 68 yards. I'm not sure which. That really broke the game open. They came out with a field goal, then a touchdown, and then another touchdown. And Montreal didn't get anything going in the second half. They actually brought in Vernon Adams, who played at Oregon last year, quarterback, for the fourth quarter, to give him some experience, and he didn't look very good at all. It doesn't look like he's ready for the league. Montreal really threw up the white flag after the third quarter here. For Hamilton, the running game, C.J. Gable was used a lot more. I guess they just felt like they could run. I mean, he was used even in the first half. They played kind of a more ball control game. I think that was maybe to not let Masoli go interception crazy and let the game get in his head like it did the week before. And Tyquan Underwood for Hamilton was the best receiver on the day. I think a lot of people had Luke Tasker, or Andy Fantuz in their lineups, and they got burned. Masoli only had 200 passing yards total, so nobody really had a big day for Hamilton. But the Hamilton defense scored 24 points. They were the top scoring defense of the week. They had a lot of sacks on Montreal. The Montreal offensive line was just pathetic. And, of course, they got the 6 points for the Brandon Banks touchdown on their defense as well. And this game, the total went all the way. I think it opened at 49 and went all the way down to 46, and it stayed under. So that's pretty low. Usually when totals start to get under 45 is when I start to think about playing an over. So I stayed away from that under. But even if the Alouettes had scored a mercy touchdown at the end of the game and a 2-point conversion, that could have put that total in jeopardy there. So
yeah,
it can be perilous when the totals are that low. All right.
Is that generally the bet that you're most uncomfortable with in CFL, taking the under? The over rather.
The thing, in the gambling community, there's a euphemism about nobody likes to root for an under. It's not fun. It's not a fun bet. Everybody likes to root for points. They like to root for the over. And that's why the books shade the lines to encourage people to bet over. But if the bookmakers are making the lines correctly or adjusting the lines correctly, overs and unders are going to be fairly even over the long run. But with the CFL, I meant to talk about this more during the previews, but the CFL, when a game gets down to 44.5 or 44, I saw games get down to 42 last year. I play the over. It's almost an instant play for me to play the over. And then when on vice versa, when the games get up to 55, 56, 57, I look for reason to play the under. Is there going to be bad weather? Who's out this week? Who's returning kicks? Those total bets have been pretty money for me over the last couple of years. You just have to find the good situations. I just think people have a lot of recency bias, especially when they sports bet. This team, whether it's NFL or CFL, the Titans looked horrible in week 2. They lost by 28 points, and then they'll cover. You get 7.5, and they cover the next week easily. So, it's just, again, like I said, you glean the most information from watching the games, and if you can put 3 or 4 games together, you get a picture of what the team's really capable of. But this game was kind of an anomaly because Montreal was so devastated by injury.
So tell me what you gleaned from the BC Lions and the Riders.
Well, I have to be 100% honest, and I missed this game because I went to an improv show on Saturday night.
Oh, who'd you see?
I saw a local improv group that one of my friends was actually doing a photography gig, taking pictures for
Oh, cool.
So I went, and it's just a local amateur group. They actually run a little school, and it's a really good time. For $10, you can't beat it. I laughed my ass off. Anyway, back to football. This game, from the highlights I watched and from the box scores, this game was a tale of two halves. Saskatchewan actually went out in front 23-10 at halftime. So they had a pretty good first half. BC came storming back. A couple of things that happened that I knew were going to happen, and I talked about it in week 1 or week 2 with the Saskatchewan's case. Number one, Jonathan Jennings had the kind of game for British Columbia that I always thought he was capable of. He had 429 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. About 40-something DraftKings points. And that's, I think that's the most that any quarterbacks put up this year.
Oh, wow.
So after being benched in the previous game, again, recency bias, he came back with this. And part of the reason is, number one, they went down early and he had to throw the ball. But also, he had to make things happen where he's been very scripted in the first few weeks of the season where, if the play didn't develop the way it was drawn up, he would throw the ball out of bounds or take a sack or try not to be risky with the ball. He didn't scramble a lot. This game, they were down, so he had to take initiative and make something out of broken plays and whatnot. And he just has a lot of athletic ability, and that showed. Also, the other thing that happened was Darian Durant got hurt again. Surprise. And they went to Mitchell Gale, I believe the name is, of the Riders' backup. The fact that I don't know right away who the Riders' backup, that should give you an idea of what their quarterback situation is like going forward. He did not have a bad game, the replacement, but they were unable to score any points in the second half. They scored 4 points in the second half of the game. Now, flipping back very quickly to British Columbia, Sean Gore, Burnham, Nick Moore, and Arsenault all had decent games. Two of them had 100-yard games. Two of them had close to 100-yard games, but they spread out all the TDs. So not one player, earned all the bunches of points, but they all did good. If you went contrarian and played some of these BC players, which I said I was going to stay away from because they were just a big question mark, you were rewarded for doing that. And Nick Moore got hurt celebrating a touchdown. So he looks like he's on the I think it's an ACL, and he is on the 6th game, and there were rumblings that he might be out for the year.
That's the worst injury too. That's just
yeah. Reminds me, there's obviously in baseball there've been a couple injuries like that, but also there was a kicker for the Tampa Bay. I forgot who it was.
Martin Gramatica?
It was Gramatica, yeah. I was going to say it wasn't one of the several Zadejas brothers. It was somebody else.
There was also, you remember Teddy Ginn?
Yes. He got hurt celebrating.
The return, the opening kickoff in the national championship game, rolled his ankle celebrating.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
Now on the Riders side of the ball, Naaman Roosevelt had a monster game, 8 for 153 yards. Not sure how much of that came from Darian Durant and how much came from the backup, but he was basically their only option. I had Ricky Collins and on my cash lineup. Had a big game the week before, and he just didn't get many targets. He got targets in the fourth quarter when they were running hurry up offense, and that was about it. He wasn't part of the offensive plan that week. It's one of those things. I just don't think you can predict targets. I really don't. And Steele, the running back, had a very ineffective game. I think he had 1 catch, and he had about 10 rushing yards, was just completely ineffective. And this was a home game for them, too, so makes you wonder. So going forward, after reviewing all the games, obviously Montreal with all their injuries, and Saskatchewan, who I said in week 1, those were the 2 biggest question marks this year. I consider them still big question marks. By the way, this is the only game that went over. It went way over. I think the total was 50.
Yeah.
BC was actually a 3-point dog, maybe 3.5-point dog in this game. So they covered easily, obviously. They won outright. But, everybody was saying BC's got such a great defense, but their offense is coming together. They've got weapons. It's not like, Jonathan Jennings is 23 years old. He's still young. I think he's, he could be the star quarterback of the league. He doesn't play, he plays in kind of that nondescript West Coast market, but because that game's always a 10 o'clock game, it's always on late or whatever. But he could be a superstar in the league, and I think hopefully they won't give him such a quick hook in the future.
Well, that takes us to game selection, this week's special strategy topic you were hoping to touch on. And I'm just going to give the floor to you because you got some very detailed notes typed out here and obviously some great information to pass along to all of our listeners.
Well, what I wanted to talk about this week is what I call game selection. And I want to point out that this is not game theory, and I'm not going to discuss game theory at all. Game selection is choosing the contest that best fits your ability to handicap, project a score. Basically choosing the contest that gives you the best chance to win. And what I mean by that is not what buy-in or not, what the prize is. It's about which games are going to be played in which that fit your ability to decide which players you want to use. And I'm going to use, to make this simplified, I'm going to use Week 4's schedule. And this last week we had a game on Wednesday, a game on Thursday, a game on Friday, and a game on Saturday. We had 4 games like we do every week. So what DraftKings does is their first contest is they put out is the full slate Wednesday through Saturday, and people play that. But what happens is if you miss that, if Wednesday night comes and goes and you miss that, you can still play CFL by playing the 3-game slate, which is Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And if for some reason you miss that and you're on Friday and you want to play, you can play the 2-game slate, which is just the Friday and the Saturday game. So what most DFS players do is they just look at the lobby on whatever day they just happen to be perusing the website. And they sign up for whatever contest is available. But if you plan ahead and think about the right contest that you want to be in, this is going to give you an advantage. And I want to give you 2 examples using this same schedule, this 4-day schedule that I just talked about. So option number 1, if there's big uncertainty in the Saturday game, the last game on the schedule due to injury, weather, suspensions, whatever, my advice would be to play the full 4-game slate, the Wednesday through Saturday, which gives you the most options to build a high floor cash lineup and avoid all the uncertainty in the Saturday game. That gives you the most options to just go around that and avoid that meteorite. Now, I know there's late swap for Saturday, but this gives you, the biggest pool of big upside players that have clarity on their usage, on their roles, whatever you want to call it. And the second scenario is the same game has the Wednesday game has the uncertainty, not the Saturday game. So what do you do? Well, a lot of people would say, "Oh, I'm playing the Wednesday through Saturday slate. I'm just going to fade the Wednesday game, or I'm going to fade this team
right
on the Wednesday game." My advice is to just don't click enter. Wait for the Thursday through Saturday slate, and then you've avoided that landmine. And you can hop in and you can put that lineup with all the players that you have confidence in to score well that week. The patience is just going to pay off. It's a very simple concept. I just don't think a lot of people think about it. They don't, when they approach the game, they just look in the lobby and say, "Oh, $50,000 tournament," and that's DraftKings marketing at work. They want you to see that. That's what they want to point out, is they want you to imagine a giant cardboard check in your head, But whether you're playing cash games or GPPs, I think if you have, and the same applies if you want to extrapolate this to the NFL, the Monday night football game or the Thursday night football game. A lot of people don't like to play the Thursday night football game because of the uncertainty with injuries going into Sunday. Now, again, there's late swap, but if you lock in certain players, especially in the CFL where there's only 4 games, that can limit your swap ability, for lack of a better term.
I like that word. Just fine.
So anyway, that's it. Just a little strategy topic. And again, if you have any questions, you can always get me on Twitter, and I'll either put them into the podcast or try to answer them to you online.
All right. Well, I think this is the part of the podcast where we talk about one of our sponsors. And this week, we're going to talk about Audible.com. Audible.com is the industry leader in audiobooks, and they have a very special deal for all of you right now. A free audiobook of your choice, absolutely no obligation. All you have to do is sign up for a 30-day free trial. You can go to audibletrial.com/fearthebeardmedia. That's audibletrial.com/fearthebeardmedia. And claim your free audiobook right now, tomorrow, later in the week, whenever you want to do it. And as long as you cancel the service before the 30-day trial period is over, if you decide you don't want to keep it, you will not be charged a thing, and you will actually get to keep that audiobook for yourself. Just to give you folks a couple of good titles in case you're wondering, what the hell am I going to listen to? Well, it's just like a podcast, so find something that interests you. And if you're interested by history, I would definitely recommend the Alexander Hamilton biography by Ron Chernow. And I'm also a big fan of any and all things written by Malcolm Gladwell, if you're sort of a business fanatic. So those are two places for you to start looking if you're not sure. Maybe you've been out of reading books for 15, 20 years like a lot of folks. There's definitely an opportunity for you to get back in, treat it like a podcast, and increase your knowledge. Use audibletrial.com/fearthebeardmedia, free audiobook, no obligation to you. And with that, John, Calgary at Winnipeg.
Nice transition there. We got Calgary a 5-point favorite. 50 points is the over-under. And you have to like the Stampeders in this spot, especially after I just dissed the Bombers coaching staff. Even though Winnipeg's at home, they just haven't put it together on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think they've scored more than 20. They haven't scored more than 28 points in a game. And that game where they scored 28 points, 2 of those touchdowns, one was a defensive touchdown, and the other one was a defensive turnover brought into the red zone. So Calgary also, somebody posted on Twitter today. I'm not taking credit for coming up with this stat, but they're like 18-0 coming off a bye week in the last couple of years. I don't know. There's 2 bye weeks a year, or 8-0. I don't know, the last 4 years or something like that. I screwed that all up. But let's talk about the players. Joe West, the receiver for Calgary, is out. You would think that Bo Levi Mitchell is an attractive play here. Like I said, he's the game manager quarterback, and he's going to have an occasional big game. But since Joe West is out for Calgary, they're starting a guy that's not even in the player pool for Cal. I think his name's Wilson. But Bakari Grant is the guy that the value play for Calgary. He's going to get some looks. Whether he had a little bit of the dropsies against Ottawa, so I kind of laid off him. But he's someone you might look at. Jerome Messam, I think, is the play here, the big running back for Calgary. Whenever, like I said last week, whenever they're going to be favored and they're going to try to ball control, run out the clock, that's when he shines. And I think that this is going to be one of those games. On the Winnipeg side of the ball, I think you got to like Andrew Harris any week if you're going to play him at running back. But they've got to show Winnipeg has to show me something more after 4 weeks. They haven't shown that they can put up the 30 points they're going to need to win this game. They may keep it close. Winnipeg's defense is decent. They might keep it close and they might cover, but I don't really have an opinion on the over/under here. But you got to like Calgary and taking players from the Calgary side of the ball.
Ottawa at Saskatchewan.
All right, so we talked about Saskatchewan being a huge question mark. We also talked about my love for Ottawa, not the city, but the Red Blacks. Ottawa's a 5.5-point favorite right now, and 55 points is the total. Another road favorite. The road teams have been kicking butt this year. So Durant is, they've already said he's not going to play. I don't think he's on the 6-game injury list, but he's not playing this week. So Mitchell Gale is going to be the quarterback for Saskatchewan. I feel like you might want to play, if it stays 5.5, that might be worth playing for a wager. So the big question is, does Chris Williams bounce back? Does Trevor Harris go to some other receiver? I think if you're going to spend $11,000, I think you're better spending it on the Trevor Harris quarterback than a wide receiver. The last couple of weeks he's put up 300, close to 400 yards each week. He didn't have as many points as Mike Riley last week, but he's been more consistent. So if you want to pair him with another Ottawa receiver, you could do that. You could try Ellingson again, or Sinopoli, or Ernest Jackson. If you include Chris Williams, all 4 of those guys could have a big game. Like I said before about Ottawa, that the DFSers are going to play Nick Grigsby, and I think he's going to be very disappointing for them at some point, sooner rather than later. I don't know if it's going to be this week. I'm not sure on this total yet. I want to see where it goes. Saskatchewan is not going to be. They're not going to score 7 points, but they might only score 14 or 17 here. But it seems like most of their games have been pretty high scoring. Even the one against Toronto was 30-17. That was 47 points. So no opinion just yet, but if it goes up a few points, I might lean under there. Now, on the Saskatchewan side of the ball, I can only recommend Amon Roosevelt. I can't really recommend anybody else. It's one of those things, like I like Steele as a running back, but I can't. If they're in the lead and they're trying to ball control, he's going to grind out those 6, 7, 8, 9 yard carries and just give you points. But there's just too much uncertainty with Saskatchewan, especially with a backup quarterback. You can't. The drop off. That was the one thing I wanted to say about Rakeem Cato back earlier in the podcast. Is Rakeem Cato? I did say this in a backhanded way, kind of. He's not a bad quarterback. I think if he got a shot with another team, I think he would put up some pretty impressive numbers. It's just the situation he's in. It's a disaster. And, it would be interesting to see what he would do with the Riders, because I think that he would have a better shot at succeeding. But anyway, you got to like the Red Blacks here. This looks like if there's going to be a stinker game this week, I think that either the Calgary or the Ottawa ones are going to be stinkers.
Hamilton at Edmonton. Another high total.
Yes, 55. And the reason... by the way, Edmonton is right now as a 4.5 point favorite. This game really interests me, and the reason it's piqued my interest is that you've got the Tiger Cats defense, which was really good last week, albeit against Montreal, and the Eskimos offensive line that has been able to protect Mike Riley all year long, give him time to throw the ball and rack up big yardage. So this is a test to show who's more dominant league-wide. Is it the Hamilton defense or is it the Edmonton offensive line? So I'm very interested to watch that matchup, and that is something that the box score is not going to show. That's something that you really have to watch to see. But as far as the fantasy aspect of the game goes, it's really hard to fade Mike Riley, Darius Bowman, Darrell Walker, and John White against anybody, even against Hamilton. They're all considered plays that have potential. Corey Watson is a nice value pick. He's like their third receiver option. I just on the Hamilton side of the ball, I just can't bring myself to play Masoli. I'm kind of hoping that maybe they announce tomorrow or Friday that Claros is ready to come back. If he comes back, I'm all over taking Hamilton plus the points here because he's that much better. Brandon Banks is still 60. I think he's 6,700 right now. It's a very fair price. I don't see how you cannot play him. There's very few players for that kind of money that's going to give you that 14 points. And the thing is, if he doesn't get a big return, and by the way, last week, Brandon Banks, they were intentionally kicking away from him, trying to kick out of bounds whenever possible. And what happened was, as soon as they got backed up into their own end zone and they had to punt the ball, they couldn't kick it out of bounds. It's a penalty. And they had to kick to him, and the magic happened. So, I think there's very few players at that price point that will give you the kind of upside that he gives you. If Masoli does play, I like the under here, especially if it gets to 56. 56 is 8 touchdowns and 8 extra points. So Hamilton in Edmonton, their kickers have not been they're not. I wouldn't consider them to be long-range kickers. They lose their accuracy outside at like 40-ish yards. So that leads me to think about an under here. But interesting game. As I said before, when the totals get up to 55, 56, 57, I think like 59.5 is the biggest I've ever seen. I look for reason to play the unders. So we'll see where it ends up.
What about this one? Last game here, Montreal at Toronto, 44.5 point total. Is this one ripe for an overbet?
Yeah. First of all, can I say 3 magic words Monday night football. That's not preseason. So I'm very excited that there's a game on Monday night. It does kind of stretch the week out from Thursday to Monday, but hey, that's what an NFL week is like.
Yep.
So, 44.5 is, again, recency bias. Both of these teams had crappy games last week. Toronto's proven they can put up 30 points. I don't think that that's a problem. And I think if Torrey Gurley sits out and they've had a week to prepare for the game, that's going to help Toronto in their receiving play calling. There may have been a player or two that was forced to play that wasn't ready to play. Montreal, you don't really know, but they're playing a much softer defense than they played against Hamilton last week. So 44, if this goes down at all, if it gets to under 44 even, I think you have to play the over. I think even at 44.5, it's an attractive wager. I'm just watching it to see where it goes. It may not move very much for the next day or two because obviously they haven't announced the depth charts and everything. So by the way, I already talked about Vernon Adams, so I have that in the notes. But the most important thing on the Montreal side of the ball is Kevin Glenn is back from his pink eye. And that should really help the Als offense. He is, he's a career CFLer. He's 35 years old. He's been in the league for, 12 years or whatever. He can throw the ball. He may throw a red zone pick now and again, but he'll put some points. If this game is 20-20, then a field goal puts you right there at the number. So I think 44 is very doable. On the Toronto side of the ball, Brandon Whitaker seems to be becoming a bigger and bigger part of the offense for Toronto every week. As I talked about him being a ball control guy, and they play him when they have the lead. Even though when they were behind with Ottawa, he still got looks. So that, again, that may have something to do with Gurley sitting and Kenny Shaw taking his place. I do think the game will be competitive, so I like the over. And there's really not much more to say about it. There aren't too many other players that I would play from this game. One player I played last week, Taylor, for Toronto, is their return guy. He had some decent yardage. He hasn't broken one for a touchdown, but he's only like 3,300 or something along those lines. So if he can get 6 points, that's 2 times value. 6.6. If you talk about very quickly before we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you talk about a cash game, winning a cash game on CFL on DraftKings, you get 50,000 to spend. So 50 DraftKings points would be 1 times value, 100 would be 2 times value, and 150 would be 3 times value. So to win a cash game, I think like a solid cash point is 125 points. So that's halfway between 2 times value and 3 times value. So when you go to put your lineups together this week, you want to think about that when you're spending your salary cap. If I take a guy like Taylor for Toronto, who's only 3,300, if he gets 120 return yards total between kick returns and punt returns, that's 6 points. 6.6 would be like 130 something return yards, 132. That's 2 times his value. So if you get 2 times value out of half of your lineup and 3 times value out of half of your lineup, you're pretty safe to cash in cash games. So, that's kind of what you're looking for. You don't, everybody wants the home runs. There's no question about that. It's great when you pick the guy that scores 45 points. But, those little adjustments like that, that's what's going to make you money. That's what's going to increase your bottom line.
Absolutely.
So as always, you can contact me on Twitter at Buffalo Hold'em. If you have any questions or you want to see what my plays are going to be, I'll try to throw out a lineup for you tomorrow. I've already played with it a little bit. So we'll see what happens. I might just do a cash lineup this week. But good luck to everybody. I hope you enjoy the games. It's going to be another great week of football.
Absolutely, and as always, you can follow him on Twitter at Buffalo Hold'em, spelled just like it sounds. The YouTube channel of the same name will also have a carbon copy of this podcast. And of course, you can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, etc., any podcasting app that you might use. Or you can head to fearthebeardmedia.com and check out the post once it's up and running there. We will see you all for week 6. Take care.
Howdy, folks. This is Gabriel Crazy Gaby Harbor, founder of Fear the Beard Media. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider pledging your support for Fear the Beard Media at patreon.com/Fear the Beard Media. I've got big dreams for the Fear the Beard Media podcast network, but those can't be realized without the support from listeners like yourself. Your support will help us grow the Fear the Beard Media podcast network so we can help more talented broadcasters get their podcasts on the air. I've created some unique and hopefully entertaining reward levels for all of our patrons on Patreon, starting from as low as just $1 of support per month. It would mean the world to all of us if you chose to pledge your support at patreon.com/Fear the Beard Media. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, or through any other major podcast directory. Head over to fearthebeardmedia.com and check out all the podcasts on the Fear the Beard Media podcast network. If you're interested in starting a podcast or joining the Fear the Beard Media podcast network with your current podcast, email us at fearthebeardmedia@gmail.com. We'd love to get you on our network, absolutely free, no cost to you. Follow us on Twitter and Snapchat at FearBeardMedia and on Instagram at FearTheBeardMedia. Until next episode, take care.